dear friends, dear comrades. I wish you a nice evening, and I'm very happy that you're all here. I can announce this event today. It was actually planned for the first semester, but couldn't happen due to COVID entry restrictions. Maybe some of you joined our Discord event with Marcus. Thank you very much again for this great presentation. And now I'd like to, I'm very proud to shortly introduce our guest today. He's one of those people who have dedicated their whole life to fight against racism and fascism, knowing that this can mean repression and prison. He was a member of the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, and was illegally imprisoned for 19 years as a result. And these days, he came all the way from the United States of America to Graz to give us a lecture about global power structures. He will show us ways to fight for our common interests and inspire us for our own struggle. It's a great honor to meet you. Please welcome Dhoruba bin Wahad. I'm sorry for pronouncing the name wrong.
First of all, I'm pleased to be here. I'm honored to be here to talk to you, talk to young people about the historical moment that we are living in, and hopefully inspire or inform or otherwise encourage you to take history into your own hands and change this world that we presently live in. I think it's very important for us to understand some of the forces that are at work in our lives right now. Many of you are young students. You have yet to embark on your careers and move into the mainstream of life and raise families and have children. But sadly, the world that we're inheriting, the times that we live in, doesn't forebode well for our offspring and our children. So we have to have courage. We have to face the forces of white supremacy, of class, oppression, of hatred, religious bigotry. We have to transform these forces into a positive new world. I assure you, once this virus becomes less politicized and recedes to the background in our lives, the world will never be the same again. We are never going to return to that normal that we knew before March or before January. Everything is going to be different. But most important, and I think most crucial for all of us, is to understand that at this time, this moment, this place, you have to make your voices heard. You have to change this world before we lose it entirely in the smothered, in the soot, in the carving of a globe, of a planet that's dying. And we're the cause of it. And I say we, I'm not including myself, of course. It's mainly the result of the rapaciousness of Europe, of imperialism, of colonialism, of capitalism. These are the enemies of humanity, and these are the enemies of creation. I don't know how many of you are Muslim, but I will assure you that the Muslims are urged in the Quran to stand for the right and forbid the wrong, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to fight for those who cannot protect themselves. So, I want to start by giving you a brief history about the United States, the leading and most prominent purveyor of violence in the world. The United States of America, that democratic beacon on the hill. I know we have all watched TV and we see, all of James Bond movies and all of the Hollywood, and then now Netflix is universal, so I guess everybody watches Netflix. I saw some movies on at the hotel, and they were translated into German without the subtitles. And the guy is running his lips, and he's talking in German, and I'm saying to myself, I saw this movie. So, I don't speak German, although I wish I did. I wish I was someone who spoke a multiplicity of languages, like W.E.B. Du Bois, who spoke 6 or 7 languages. But unfortunately, I was raised in the United States. I was raised and educated in schools, run by fools, uneducated schools. And so, like most Americans, I believe that the only language I'm supposed to speak is American. Anybody that doesn't speak American, there's something wrong with them. That type of jingoistic arrogance. Well, I wrote a piece in 1989 that I published in the now defunct Black Scholar. It was about towards rethinking self-defense in a racist culture. And it was about African American survival in an era of transition. And I think all of us are looking at the televisions now, and we saw that spectacle. I don't know if you watched it, that spectacle that was called the presidential debate the other night. You had 2 old white men sitting there, 2 fart busters, sitting there, standing there. One, the orange man, marmalade man, constantly cutting off the born-again racist and white supremacist Joe Biden. And we said, damn, this is what we got to look forward for the next 4 years, one of these 2 guys? Yeah, that's what you got to look forward to. But I assure you, I'm not a prophet. I don't have a crystal ball. But I've been around the bend a few times. I doubt very seriously 4 years from now, either one of them are going to be around on this planet. God don't like ugly. And they out of here sooner or later. Hopefully soon. But I don't know how many of you have studied American or Europe, well, now I'm going to say European history. American history. How many of you have really researched and studied American history? One person? Don't you know America is the leader of the free world? How could you not study American history? Everything's about America. Americans are, they run everything. They know everything. How could you not study that? That's like living in the days of Rome and not studying Roman history. So that's good though. That means that I'm going to influence you in a way that's completely negative to American history. And I'm quite sure that some professor will come along and tell you that this guy was lying, it's not true. I have been kicked out of plenty of academic institutions, and I'm quite sure getting kicked out of this one won't bother me at all. But I want to give you a little quick history of the United States from the perspective of Africans who were kidnapped from Africa in the 17th century and brought to the United States, and for over 300 years remained in a condition of chattel slavery. This period of enslavement of African people provided the accumulated wealth that would make America the #1 nation it is today. But this was a violent process. This was a decidedly inhumane period. And my people suffered through it. And we survived. The testimony of our survival is personified in my mere presence here. I wouldn't be here if my ancestors didn't survive white supremacy and child slavery. But they didn't survive intact. A lot of our much of our humanity was taken away from us. And our ability to proclaim our freedom, our independence, our self-determination was thwarted at every turn for 300 years. So don't expect me to humanize the enemies of the sun. Please don't try to provide an explanation for white supremacy. There is no explanation for it, other than greed, other than hatred, other than inhumanity. That's the only explanation. And so I'm not going to give you a viewpoint that you will hear in Princeton, in Harvard, or in the educational institutions of the world, the Western world. I'm going to give you a viewpoint that you probably suspect, but some of you on the left may not appreciate. Because, sadly, white supremacy is a social construct that transcends the parameters of left and right. You have leftists who are racist, and you have fascists who are liberal. Liberal fascism, man, what does that mean? That means that you don't get killed outright. That means you stick around for a little while, and you're given certain inconsequential reforms and rights to make you think that you're free. I call it democratic fascism. The delusion of democracy and having a voice without power. It's delusional. But I guess all of us here know the history of fascism in the 20th century, don't we? I mean, we could basically cut to the chase here, right? Or no? All right. Well, fascism, as we know it, or as it has become, as it evolved, really began in this part of the world. Surprise! Europeans are responsible for giving the world fascism. And they didn't give the world dictatorships. I mean, they had dictatorships back when, probably long before the pharaohs built the pyramids. But we weren't around in that moment. At least the Europeans were. So I'm going to give you a brief history, and I'm going to use some of the excerpts from something that I wrote a long time ago. I don't know how well you can grasp certain things in English, certain terms that I use in English. I'm quite sure there's an equivalent term in German or Italian or whatever, but like I said, you know, I'm linguistically challenged. So I have to do it in English. So if you do not understand where I'm coming from sometimes during the question and answer period, could you please just jot it down and ask the question, you know, what do you mean by so-and-so? Or what do you mean by this and that? Because I don't want to talk over you. I don't want to talk down to you. I want to talk to you. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes I don't like to do lectures or forums, because it feels like I'm talking down to people. You know, usually if it wasn't for social distancing, you know, I told everybody to come closer. You know, but we can't do that here.
For me, it would be easier if you talk a little bit slower.
I should talk slower. Ooh. We're going to be here all night. No, I hear you. Okay, let me begin. Somebody's, whose ringtone is that? What is that, Bach or somebody? Somebody got a ringtone? Bach? Yeah. I thought you would have Tupac or somebody with a ringtone. Okay, all phones off. All agents of the state, turn off your recorders or turn them down so we don't get feedback. And Because one thing is really bad is when you're talking to an audience and undercover agents, microphone gives you feedback. Where's that coming from? You gotta say no, you know. So, okay, let me start, and I will try to talk slow. Power most often costs more than it's worth. The man who attains power, not knowing its proper use, loses it in the end. For all that is held by power will someday revolt. Will someday revolt. Notes from unstruck music. The history of the United States is a violent one. The seizure of North American landmass from its original inhabitants was a decidedly violent, genocidal undertaking. The use of African chattel free slave labor to create the foundation for the great American economic industrial miracle was steeped in ruthless cruelty and maintained by the omnipresent threat of violence. Early 20th century projections of U.S. power into Central America, the Caribbean, and elsewhere around the world proceeded in the wake of gunboats or relied upon the bayonets of U.S. Marines. The cliche that the West was won, it's a cliche that you see in the Western movies, by the six-shooter, a gun, is often glorified in American folklore. Indeed, the sanctimonious glorification of equality based upon force could be summed up in the play on words of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, which declared that all men are created equal. And when the United States, when the European settlers were killing the Indians and forging a nation, they used the term, all men are created equal. And Samuel Colt, all men were created by God, and Samuel Colt made them equal. In other words, it's saying that God created us all, but it's the gun that makes us equal. The gun is what makes us equal. And you wonder why America seems obsessed with guns. Well, don't feel left out. Krupp, the ones that manufactured 88 howitzers, Tiger tanks, you know, they're your ancestors. Indeed, the sanctimonious glorification of violence is something that is not unique to the United States. It has been argued by historians and sociologists that early American westward expansion created a uniquely American, white American fascination with guns and violence, and the resort to force as an arbiter of conflict. Perhaps but it is the Eurocentric class construct of the social and institutional use of force that is of concern to us today. Passing attention to the historical personality of American pioneers serves only to place the contemporary American personality in context. The connection between the past Euro-American attitudes towards force and violence and its contemporary institutionalization is a study in the evolutionary process of racist violence. For there is an apparent subconscious presumption on the part of white Americans that they have a moral right to use force whenever their privileges are threatened. And that people of color have no such equivalent right, no such equivalent moral right to defend themselves. The institutionalization of this attitude adds a dimension to the concept of African American self-defense that would be absent in a homogeneous society, where the subjugation of one segment of society by another did not have its origins in historical racist violence and racist dehumanization. In other words, I'm trying to express there that the dichotomy of imperialism, of colonialism, because we all know that America was a European settler state. It was a colony. The first European settlers that came to the United States and came to what is now the United States, the North American landmass in 1619, were Europeans. They were Christians. They were so-called Puritans. They were fleeing religious persecution and domination in Europe. But they were citizens of the crown. They were British citizens. And they came to a landmass where there were native peoples, indigenous people. Of course, they called them Indians because Christopher Columbus was so stupid that when he sailed west to go to India and came across the first landmass of people, he called them Indians. They looked at him like, yeah, okay, cool, we Indians. Who did you say you were again? You know? And then they saw the gold hanging around their neck. They saw them wearing trinkets that looks like diamonds and all of this stuff. Whoa! They got a lot of bling. And they, I mean, these guys got what? They got machetes, they got, you know, bows and arrows. Man, we could take this. They were bullies. Yeah, I hate bullies. But they were bullies. They said, okay, we could take this gold. What they going to do about it? In fact, less than 10 to 15 years after Christopher Columbus discovered or sailed across the Caribbean Sea, in the Caribbean islands, the Carib Indians were extinct. They were wiped out. They no longer existed. But to the native people, that we call it Indians, when they saw the white man, when they saw the settlers coming in, they were all bedraggled, and, you know, starving. I mean, you know, it took a long time to sail across the Atlantic back then in a ship. And so it's not like now you can jump on a plane and wind up in New York 8 hours later. I mean, this like took damn near a year. So they were hungry. They landed in an environment that they were totally unfamiliar with. There were animals there that they never saw before. There was fauna and forests that they never even imagined. So they did not know how to survive. But to the native people, to the Indians, they were human beings. And the Indians, the native people, wouldn't let them die. So when the winter came and they were starving and they were shivering and they didn't know how to dig up a root, they didn't know where food came from, and the ground was hard as a rock, native people taught them how to get food, showed them what to hunt, helped them survive those first winters. And what did the native people get in return? Genocide. Of course, if they were smart, they would kill them all. And we wouldn't have America today to talk about in this room. But they were human. They were one with nature. They believed that the great creator made nature for all of us, for humanity. They actually were Muslims. Because you see, in Islam, to the Muslims, Allah says that I have created you in different colors, speaking different languages, so that you would know each other, not so that you would hate each other. So they gave them food. They helped them to survive, although they could not understand a mumbling word that they were saying. And once the Europeans survived, they began to thrive. And then they began to covet and take the land of the very people that enabled them to survive. They killed them. They took their land. They expanded westward, killing and stealing and raping all the way. And more Europeans came from Europe. In fact, Britain emptied out its jails and its prisons and sent the convicts and the inmates to the New World to colonize it. That's how you got Australia. Australia is a nation of convicts. The descendant, every white person in Australia's antecedent was a criminal. Straight away. No chaser. Criminal. Came from British jail. So, the native people were rewarded for their humanity with genocide. And in order to kill other people like this and steal their land, you had to dehumanize them. You had to make them savages. You had to make them animals. So, the mentality was born that just like the colonials who went to India from the British Empire and who explored the world and colonized the world, that it was the duty of Europeans to civilize the world. It's called white man's burden. And we could, I know some of us have read the poet of imperialism, what's his name? I'm looking for his name. I'm getting too old to see now to remember these things in detail. But the idea was that everybody was savages except Europeans. And that they had a civilizational duty to bring enlightenment to people of color. So the violence and the theft and the murder of people and the stealing of their land was codified into a racist construct, a white supremacist construct. In fact, Europeans turned the lack of melanin on its head. Because everywhere they went, people had color, except them. The native people were brown and red. Asian people were light, so-called yellow. Africans were black. The only people that didn't have melanin was your ancestors. Well, I mean, if you're the minority in the world and everybody else has color, either you're inferior or you're the exception, or you're superior and they're the exception. So they turned it on its head. White was right, black, get back, was wrong. White was pure, black was evil. White was light, black was darkness. So this justified looting, stealing people's lands. Because you weren't really stealing anything. What were they going to do? It was just there. And in fact, they could work the land for us. And we'll just keep them in check and we won't give them anything. So, the idea and notion of peaceful coexistence in imperialism is a fantasy. Peaceful change and reform of a racial construct like this is impossible. And this injustice this heinous, inhumane treatment of people of color over the decades, over the centuries, has come down to us as what we know as the age of expansion and exploration, the conquest of the New World, the plunder of native lands in Africa. Now, before the Europeans got there, the native people, they had their own civilization. They had their own governments. They had their own empires. And these empires also had conflicts and contradictions, but they were not based on race. In fact, native people in North America, when they did go to war between different tribes, war was more or less theater. They had their champions who fought from both sides. Never was war taken to the level of genocide. And in Europe, it's the same way. Europeans evolved from tribes and clans. We all know that. It was the Goths and the Visigoths, the Latins and the Vandals. The Vandals, my favorite crew. They were so rapacious that they named their behavior, they made their behavior the name for burn, loot, rape, and pillage. Vandals. Of course, they're your cousins, they're Germanic. So y'all know all about that. Burn, loot, rape, and pillage. What's vandalism? Vandalism is the destruction of property, the wanton violence and destruction and theft and murder and all of these things. That's what a vandal does. It was the Vandals, I believe, who sacked Rome. Did they do it first, or was it the Goths? Another Germanic tribe. And when these individuals, when these tribes became nation states, they of course coveted the lands and territories of their contiguous people around them. And they went to war and they created empires. And to this day, we have what we now know as Europe. It began with the Franks. It began with the different Gothic tribes. In fact, the Vikings, who for, I think, 300 years, used to come down from the North Sea and from the north and burn, loot, rape, and pillage all the way down the channel to the UK, but it's not the UK. For centuries. So you built your castles, you built your forts strategically along certain waterways to hold back these barbarians, these Vikings. But they were not genocidal. Yeah, they'll kill you, they chop your head off, take your land, spirit off your daughters. Hey, but that's what normal barbarians used to do. They weren't about exterminating you, root and branch, as a people. So we need to understand that this violence under colonial settlers and under empires began to evolve. This racial disparity, this view of people of color as deserving conquest and domination became institutionalized. It's even part of the religion of Christianity. I mean, we do know that missionaries accompanied the gunships of the British into Africa. And now today you have black African Christians. Some of them are political. They're the political elite. And what do? They exploit and murder their own people just like the Europeans do. So today in Africa you have 53, 54 nations, and none of them are really free and independent. They all take their example from Europe, from the Europeans. So we've inherited a world that has proceeded for almost a millennium under the auspices of violence and racism. And then comes along the first industrial war, World War I. And there was a little corporal in the German army. He was born here. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Old Adolf. He was a corporal in the military. You got to remember, Adolf wasn't a punk. You see? He had mustard gas wounds all over his body. Adolf was in the trenches. And Germany lost the war. Adolf found out, or he discovered, that he had a gift for gab. He used to sit around in the trenches with his cronies, and he would talk about the great Germany and the war, and everybody was mesmerized. He said, man, I can talk. People really listen to me. That's cool. I ain't got no power. I can't run nothing. I'm just a corporal. Right? So when the war was over, and I got to remember, I jumped over a lot of history because I happened to be in art. And I'm honored to be here to talk shit about him. And so Adolf, Germany lost the war. It's pretty cut and dry. I know all of y'all know that history. The Versailles Treaty and the moaning about how they were betrayed. And then the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe to the point where the institutional propensity for white supremacy and racism reared its ugly head in an unprecedented fashion in Europe. It was the same dynamic now, but it was based on a false notion that somehow it was traitors that caused Germany to lose the war. You didn't know I knew all this history, did you? Well, I spent playtime in jail, and all I had to do in jail was read. And the jailers and the prison authorities didn't know that in the libraries that they had were books that explained all of this. They just couldn't read. These were yahoos from the countryside who were gatekeepers, who were prison guards. They had Das Kapital. Das Kapital. Did you know how small the writing is in Das Kapital? So I must have been really crazy to read that. I mean, it was smaller than the writing in the Bible. But then I had 20/20 vision, I didn't use glasses back then. So I was able to sit and read. I read every Das Kapital from cover to cover. And that sounds nerdish, right? That sounds stupid. Who does that? But I did. And I also read the history of other people, of the Chinese, of Asia, of the Levant, of empire, of the Ottoman and the Osmanli, Turks. So I began to understand this flow of history, of human events, of human history. And of course, being black, I look for myself in there. I look for my ancestors in there. What role did they play? What happened to my people? It's a long story, but basically, it began for many of us, not just with 1619, but for Africa, with the Treaty of Berlin. How is it that always these imperialist sea changes and historical moments always happen here? The Treaty of Berlin, where they carved up Africa. Okay, you take this. Okay, Ludendorff, you could have that. Okay, Ceausescu, you got that. Meanwhile, Africa's the same thing. What's happening here? This is British territory. This is French West Africa. This is Belgian Congo. They did the same thing in Asia. But back then we didn't have cell phones because we couldn't call up the Vietnamese and say, yo, these white folks, man, what's happening with them? Man, they're trying to take our land. Really? They're doing the same shit here. We didn't have cell phones, so we couldn't communicate. So the British and the French, they carved out their empires in India and in the world. And is it any doubt or any pause for doubt to understand how English became a universal language? Why are speaking English in India? What's happening with English in French or French in Guinea? Why does Fulani and Mandinka speak French? How did that happen? Well, French was such a wonderful language, we just had to learn it. Man, I just love this romantic language, man. Listen, I got to learn French. You see? First of all, I could be a lover if I learned French, because French are lovers. So I couldn't convince most Africans of that, because they were usually spitting on the end of the bayonet. There wasn't much love in colonialism and imperialism for black folks. But the world speaks these languages, all European. Coincidence? No. By design. As a result of what? The conquest of their lands and the exploitation of their resources. So, when Adolf came back to Germany after the Germans had lost the war, he was unemployed, unemployed, walking around like Pretty Boy Floyd. You heard that? That's a rap song. And it was like what? The history books say that unemployment in post-World War I Germany was at over 40 or 50%. People didn't have jobs. They were destitute. They were starving. And Germany was being subjected to the Treaty of Versailles and its resources. It was paying reparations. German people were suffering as a result of elites who waged unprecedented war, industrial war. People were murdered on an industrial scale, unlike any other war before it. So, Hitler began to talk in the beer halls, because you know Germans, y'all love some beer. We went in the beer hall, they get drunk, and he'll sit up there, he'll pontificate, kick the Willy Bobo with them and tell them, nah, man, we don't have to live like this. That's the only reason we're living like this is because we were betrayed. Now let's make this thing here clear. Because I know there are some young people here who may consider themselves leftists, communists even. If you know the history of communism, if you know the history of revolutionary struggles, you will understand clearly that anti-Semitism, that you quote call anti-Semitism, was not the ideology of the left. It was not the theology of working class people. It was the ideology and theology of the elite who were married to the notion of white supremacy. The same white supremacy they practiced in 1619. Africans were never anti-Semitic, quote. Well, first of all, the European Jewry are not Semites. Ashkenazis are not the original Jews. And if you don't believe me, ask Jesus. Y'all do know who Jesus was, right? The guy that rode into Jerusalem on the ass, on a donkey, in rags. You remember him, right? I mean, isn't your religion named after him? He was a Jew. He was probably darker than me. You didn't know that part. You thought he had blue eyes, blonde hair, and he looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? We rode into Jerusalem and Judea back then. And what was Judea back then? It was a province of Rome. The Roman Empire. One of the greatest and foremost empires of that era. And it was under occupation, with Roman military legions stationed in Jerusalem and stationed around the Levant. It was an empire. And like all empires, it was about the exploitation of the people and their land and the theft of their resources. So when Esau ibn Maryam, to Muslims, rode into Jerusalem, the first place he wanted to go, he washed himself, he went to the temple to pray. What did you see in the temple? Money lenders. We would call them loan sharks, capitalists. They were like the version of Standard Charter and Deutsche back then. He said, yo, this is a house of worship. What are you guys doing in here changing land? So, Jesus was, y'all think that Esau ibn Maryam was nonviolent. He was not nonviolent. We kicked over the money tables, went to slapping the money lenders around, beating them up. This is Esau. It's your story. Y'all wrote this. I didn't write this. I'm just reciting it back to show you that the very person that founded the truth that Europeans ultimately based their religion on was a revolutionary who opposed imperialism, who opposed the oppression of the poor and of the weak. He was a revolutionary, as all prophets were. So he started kicking over the money table, slapping up the money lenders. So, they got together and they said, yo, this guy is crazy. Some people are calling him the Messiah that was prophesied. If he's the Messiah, we in trouble. We can't lend no more money. We can't pimp these people no more. That's out of the question. Something got to be done. So they went to Pontius Pilate, right? And he was the administrator of Judea then. He was the big Willie. He was like Pompeo is today. You see, and they went to him and said, yo, Pontius, we got this little scraggly dude here with long hair that came to ride in here on an ass, talking about, Rome, that God is superior to Rome. And that the Romans have no real authority. They went lying to the man. Pontius Pilate, of course, being a faithful Roman administrator, said, bring this guy here. Let me see this dude. Came in, looked at JC. Yo, damn, you smell bad, boy. So what is this I hear about you, talking about Roman authority, undermining the authority of Caesar? And JC said, man, look, let me tell you something. Render unto Caesar what Caesar's, and render unto God what's God. So that befuddled Pontius Pilate. Whoa, what did you just say? Give Caesar his due and give God his due. Caesar said, don't sound like rebellion to me. He told Caesar, hey, man, this is you. You got this. And, God, whoever that may be, because he believed in a lot of gods. So, I give sacrifices to God all the time. I give sacrifices to Venus and all the other gods and stuff. So he said, well, that's cool. Now, of course, money lenders, pseudo-capitalists back then, they said, yo, this didn't work. Yeah, man, it didn't work. So what are we going to do now? So, man, we need to figure out something. So what they figured was, it's always one of us. They figured, well, let's get this dude, let's get somebody to snitch on him and say that they heard him say so and so and so. And therefore, that's against Roman law, and they'll crucify him, and we'll be rid of him, and we can set up the money lending in the temples again. So they got your boy Judas. How many people here have a son named Judas? How many Christians name their child Judas? Yeah, you can't find one, right? I know, I goddamn know you can. So Judas, he did his thing, and this is all according to the scriptures of the New Testament. They did his thing, they did their thing. They convinced Pontius Pilate that this dude was some type of revolutionary threat. They dragged him out and they nailed him up on the cross, according to the Christian theology. And they nailed him up between two thugs, two criminals, right? And they crucified him. And Rome went on to be Rome, and to ultimately adopt the religion and the God of the man they crucified, of the followers of the man they crucified. Who was Peter and who was Paul? I mean, we use that term when we're broke and say we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. What does that mean? That means that the disciples that believed in this man, of course, not Judas. Judas was like, he was off, getting paid. He got paid and then bought him a new outfit. You understand? We kept it moving, you see. But over a millennium, over a period of time, the religion that was once castigated and persecuted became the religion of Rome. And then came you, the barbarians. Yeah, y'all were barbarians back then. Romans used to look at you and holy nose. Hey, this guy, he's from Bavaria. Hey, Bavaria. Where's that? That's up here in the mountains of the mist somewhere. So, this history and theological proposition became the basis and the theological basis that was married to the idea of imperialism and nations and empire. The foremost imperialist nations of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century were what? Christian. All the conquistadores, Christian. The French, Christian. The British, Christian. I have to throw in the Italians, of course, they were latecomers and stuff. But they were a sect of Christianity. I mean, the Christians even fought amongst themselves. We all know about how the Protestants came about, the Lutherans came about, and Joan of Arc and all of this stuff. I mean, y'all been whacking and killing each other over religious differences since time immemorial, since Charlemagne got off his horse and died. Okay? And out of this bouillabaisse of religious conflict, Rome was no longer the center of an empire, but it became the center of a religion, Catholicism. A sect that emerged during the religious wars of the medieval period, Middle Ages. And the Pope, I believe it was Pope Urban, or the guy before him, one of these guys. Pope Urban was a little guy. You gotta be weird, little guys like Napoleon and Urban. These are dangerous. They got what they call a Napoleonic complex. Of course, they didn't have. Pope Urban couldn't have had a Napoleonic complex then because Napoleon wasn't born yet. So he had an urbanitic complex or whatever. But anyway, he said, look, man, y'all got to stop killing each other and murdering each other. You understand? Because y'all just wasting all of the energy. You're killing Christians. People are starving. Y'all need to go liberate the Levant. Y'all need to liberate Jerusalem from the heathens, us, Muslims. And so they put the cross on, and they marched off through Turkey, through Constantinople. They marched off to the Middle East, and the shit ain't been right there since. Now, you don't think these contradictions that's happening in the Middle East have anything to do with the Crusades. You're wrong. They have everything to do with it. Because that's the legacy of imperialism, European domination and militarism in that region. And we're still living through that legacy. And if you want to get over this history and make like it didn't happen, then you are deceiving yourself, and you will never come to a resolution that will satisfy or resolve historical injustice. Every struggle that people fight today for self-determination and freedom has its roots in a historical injustice that was never addressed. And I said that to say that the origins that divide the left and that divided the Communist Party in its early stages, before the First International, was based on this history,
on these events. That's where it came from. And when we look at the conquest of Spain, when the Muslims were thrown out of Spain in the 15th century, we look at a society and a civilization. Look up Andalusia. Look up Spain under the Moors. And you'll see the Sephardic Jews were never persecuted in Spain. They were free to practice their religion. They were free to indulge in commerce. They were never looked down upon. They were never dehumanized. But they were people of color too, just like the Moors. It was only when the Christians took Spain and initiated the Great Inquisition that the roots of European anti-Semitism was born. And from that point on, Jews who adhered to that religion, European Jews who migrated from the Caucasus, the Ashkenazis, were persecuted, were murdered regularly in pogroms across the face of Europe. People of color were never anti-Semitic. Never. Never. So for those of you who will stand here and talk to me and tell me that when I call you Israel a European settler state, and that's what it is, I'm anti-Semitic, you're a liar, you're a hypocrite, you're a piece of shit. Because that's not how it happened. You see, I happen to know how it happened. So you can tell that shit to somebody else. You can believe that if you want to. Because you are just as much a white supremacist as the people that you say that hate you and then marginalize you. Because you don't know your own history. Now I know y'all didn't expect that, did you? So where did he come from with that? I just threw that in there so that you would understand that the resolution of white supremacy, the resolution to imperialism, is that you rise above these distinctions that were historically unjust. And that you create a new world, a new order that's based on equality and the humanity of all of us. That's your mission. So if you want to not unify with forces that are anti-Islamophobia, because you believe that Islam is anti-Semitic, you need to check your history. You need to check it. If you believe that black nationalism or Pan-African self-determination is anti-European, you need to check your history. Amilcar Cabral said of African liberation that the struggle to free Africa, the struggle against colonialism, is Africans' return to their own historical continuum that was interrupted by European imperialism. We had a history before Europeans showed up, and Europeans interrupted that history and made us footnotes to their history. So when we overthrow them and we run them out of Africa, we are reasserting our own historical continuum. What was Songhai? What was the empire of Ghana? What were they? There were empires when Europeans didn't even take baths. Don't act like you've been taking baths all long. Huh? Queen Victoria was so funky, man, she didn't change her underwear for a year, each spring. You see? Civilization, civilizing the savages. Who's the savage here? Who's the anti-Semite here? Who's the racist here? You need to overcome these sectarian divides that are based on a historical injustice. You have to overcome these things. That's why I'm bringing it up. That's why I'm saying that to you here. Because I know that there are forces right here in Vienna who would denigrate and marginalize the very people that brought me here to talk to you. They wouldn't support them. That in fact, I've come here to a place where the left is right and the right is left. And the people in between, they don't know what the fuck they do. How is that possible? But history is the best subject to reward all research, as Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X said. So I want to continue by saying that there is a way out of this. And it's on this generation, it's on you. That if there was a united front against fascism in 1938, we would have never had the Holocaust. If there was a united front against fascism, we would have never had the slaughter of millions of people that World War II turned out to be. Now is your time. We need now a united front across Europe against the rise of fascism. We have to overcome those differences based on ahistorical precedents, based on historical misinterpretation, and unify ourselves. We are all human beings here, and we all deserve the right to have a clean planet and to live our lives and raise our children in dignity. But there are people amongst us, there are nations among us who do not want that, who thrive off of division and racial hatred and animosity and religious differences. And we have to rectify that. Jean-Paul Sartre said in the introduction to Wretched of the Earth that every generation has an obligation to destiny, has a destiny. And it will either, that generation will either uphold that destiny or betray it. We can't kick this down the road no more, people. We can't kick white supremacy down the road and make like it can be reformed. We can't kick anti-Semitism down the road and make like imperialism is a substitute for freedom. We can't do that anymore. We don't have that much space. Your generation is called what? Generation Z? What comes after Z in the alphabet? Nothing. It means you're going to be gone sometime soon. You see? We have to think for ourselves. We have to think for each other. We have to love our differences. Because Allah made us different so that we wouldn't get bored looking at each other. So that we would be inspired by our differences and genius. We are individuals, but we all are a collective part of humanity. And this false history of white supremacy and conquest and imperialism need not be perpetuated with the European nation states that exist on this planet today. The modern national security state is the enemy of all humankind. Because in the national security state matrix, we are all potential terrorists and we are all potential criminals. That's why the cops are outside with guns and clubs and will club you into unconsciousness if you protest, if you build a mass movement. We need to ask, why is it, how is it that people from all over the world came out to the streets with signs that said Black Lives Matter, even in countries where there were no black people? Because they saw on this device a man being murdered, suffocated, a cop kneeling in his neck for over 3 minutes and 45 seconds until he died, calling for his mother. People took to the streets. Black Lives Matter. You got no black folk there. Black Lives Matter here. Because they kneeled in your neck too. These nation states kneel in our neck every day. They suppress us every day. They're violent towards minorities. They're violent towards migrants. They're violent towards people seeking a better life. They protect the rich and suppress the poor. The armed agents of the national security state. Their sole reason for existence is war and repression. So let's rethink what a nation really is. Let's rethink what justice really is. Why can't we rethink what law enforcement is? And that's what's before us right now. How to rethink power and authority. And there's more people, I assure you, on this planet than there are pigs. There's more of us than there. And so, you have the duty to your children, yet unborn, to organize, to reach across that aisle, to those who share your principles, and fight for what's right against what's wrong. We're not talking about uniformity here. We're talking about unity of principle. Of principle. Is it principle to murder Palestinian children and talk about children's rights and anti-abortion and abortion rights and anti-abortion in America and in Europe? Is that principle? Is a Palestinian child less worthy than your child? Is that principle? Is it principle to watch a despot in Africa murder and shoot people down in the street so he can stay in power? Is that principle? Those are the things that we need to unify. Not whether I speak German, you speak French. Whether I like the arts and you don't. Whether I pray 5 times a day and you don't. Whether I'm an atheist and you're not. That's not the issue. The issue is our common humanity and our ability to change this world. And that's why I came here. I came here to talk to people. You may never see me again, and I might never get out of here alive. But none of us are getting out this life alive. Did anybody think they were getting out? Raise your hand if you thought you were getting out this life alive. That's what I thought. We got unity around that, right? So if none of us are getting out this life alive, we need to do something meaningful while we're here. That's what we need to do. And I wanted to remind you of the origins of white supremacy in the European settler state in America, and how people who had humanity were murdered and genocidally exterminated by the very people they saved. Talking about looking a gift horse in the mouth. And it was done based on greed, based on an idea of racial exceptionalism, based on the idea of religious superiority. You know, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, self-determination is not just a phrase. It's a principle for human life, for human existence. Every people have the right to self-determination, to determine their own destiny. Every people. So those who fight for their right to self-determination, they're usually fighting a historical injustice that was never rectified. Whether it was a conquest, whether it was the theft of their land and the murder of their people. So, because none of us are getting out this life alive, let us unify and try to make this life better for all of us, for each of us. So the United States, getting back to my original proposition, I did go a little long because I felt that, and I see now the difference, that you were expecting me to castigate white people in America and treat them as if, you know, they were some type of monsters, which they probably are. But I wanted you to understand that you share a common history with those settlers that came to North America and killed the native people and stole their land. you share a historical continuum with colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy. So what you going to do about that? Are you going to say, man, I'm not associated with that. I don't want to be involved with that. I'm not with that history. They could keep that. That was then, and this is now, and this is what I'm going to stand for now. We can't undo the past. And they tell you that history repeats itself. I assure you that it doesn't. But it does rhyme. It does rhyme. And we were in a neo-fascist movement in the United States in 1969 when the Black Panther Party was on the scene. I know because I lived through it. When Richard M. Nixon took over for Lyndon Baines Johnson. And the civil rights movement has achieved voting rights. And the civil rights movement had integrated institutions, schools, restaurants, and black people were asserting their humanity, were asserting their human right to live free in a democracy. And the minute that that happened, and it was somewhat successful, they killed our leaders. They killed King. They killed Medgar Evers. They killed Malcolm X. They killed our leaders. And they set us on another course. The rise of conservatism and fascism in America goes all the way back to the Cold War, to 1950, 54, 53, after the Cold War, during the Cold War. It can be pinpointed exactly when Dwight D. Eisenhower, I guess you all remember him, he was the one that kicked your ass when Germany was defeated. He was the general that led the charge. Dwight D. Eisenhower became president of the United States. And when he left office, he gave a speech. Go look it up. He told the American people to beware of the military-industrial complex. Because the Cold War was used as a pretext to accumulate weapons of mass destruction, to create a corporate military symbiotic relationship that today is the modern nation state. It was in its infancy after the World War, when all of Europe was devastated, when the British economy was non-existent, when France was laid to waste because of the war, when the former imperial powers were weak. The United States of America came up with the Marshall Plan. Y'all all know about the Marshall Plan. To revitalize and rebuild Europe. And what was the first thing in the minds of the French? What was the first thing in the minds of the British? Hey man, we got to get our empires back. It's a new world order here. And we need to get back India. We need to get back Africa. And that's what they went to do. And fortunately, for people of color, they weren't trying to hear that shit. The Vietnamese people defeated the French army at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Say, man, y'all ain't getting shit back. America say, damn, man, y'all can take this back. We'll handle it. So they moved in just before the Vietnamese people were to exercise their United Nations mandate to vote for nationhood, to vote for their president, for their leader, for their system. And of course, you know who would have won? Oh, Uncle Ho. He would have won. They said, man, we can't have that. This dude is like, you know, he's anti-capitalist, man. He's talking some socialist shit. Man, we can't have that. So they divided Vietnam. They divided Korea. Is Korea still divided today? Is it? You got Kim Jong-il. I mean, his last name is Il. So you know he's ill. You know definitely don't fuck with him. Anybody that got the last name Il, you do not want to mess with them. Because they're crazy. You got Kim Jong-il, whose dad was Kim Jong-un, or whatever, who was a guerrilla that fought against the Japanese, who occupied South Korea. And then he, too, his generation, fought against the Chinese, who occupied Korea. I mean, how in the these things go on. Every people, every region has its own history. Remember the Opium Wars? So do you think that China should be loving Europeans after Opium Wars? Would you? So, but now China is the big boogeyman. The yellow plague is about to devour all of y'all, right? It's worse than coronavirus. Where did you get that idea of yellow plague, China having interest? The Chinese don't have an army anywhere in the world other than in China. Just look at this history. All of these wars, all of these contradictions. The Middle East. Look at the Middle East. All of these conflicts, whether in self, they all come out of this history of imperialism, injustice, and white supremacy. Capitalism could not thrive without white supremacy. Jingoistic nationalism could not thrive without ethnic phobia, ethnophobia, and hatred of other people. You have people fleeing across the Mediterranean to get into Europe for a better life, and they're put in concentration camps. They're shuttled into the desert to die. And why are they fleeing to Europe? Because where they come from, the imperialists have ravaged their country. So there's no hope for them where they were born. So they come to the seat of the metropoles, the imperial metropoles. Let us in Rome. Let us in Paris. We want a better life. Half of the black people in this room have a story. All of them have a story. Ask them how they got here. How did their parents come here? Why did their parents come here? And the imperialists, the rapists, the genocidal maniacs who colonized Africa have the audacity to say migrants are not wanted here. They're going to take your job, like you like to clean toilets and shit. Jobs that you don't want. They're going to take them. These people are willing to work their fingers to the bone to have a future. But to them, they're migrants. They're potential terrorists. They're potential disruptors of the status quo. So they must assimilate. Can't wear the hijab. You have to, you remember the French with the anti-hijab ordinances they passed recently? Now everybody's wearing hijab, right? We all wear hijab. God don't like ugly, y'all. Madam Rona, Corona-19, Madam Rona's gonna get your ass. You don't have a hijab. Now everybody got their face covered. You see? What goes around comes around. It's really ironic. Trump, I know you all heard Trump was diagnosed as positive with corona. He said, oh man, you can't tell me that there isn't divine justice. Even if you don't believe in religion, you gotta say, damn boy, this is divine recompense here. You see? Now he'll probably pull through, because he got the best medical attention in the world. He'll probably pull through like that asshole in London. What was his name? Johnson. Boris Johnson, with the crazy hair and shit. That dude, he pulled through, he had him on a respirator, but he made it. So this guy will probably make it. And then he's going to be a hero to the white supremacists, because then he's invincible. Corona not kicked me. Now you're going to be a hero. You're going to say, damn, that ain't right. But we are being confounded by our reality right now, and we should be very, very clear. The empire, the American empire, European global hegemony is no longer tenable. And it is collapsing and disintegrating. And you are the children of this hegemony. Are you going to let this go? Are you going to let it pass by and don't make a new world? After being quarantined for a couple of months, you had an idea what it was like to be locked down. I did it for 19 years. You see, I read. What did you do? You play TikTok. Okay? You was tweeting. You see? That's what you did. You were so bored. I said, man, I gotta get out of here. You were so bored that when they opened the doors, you rushed out to buy things, to party, to go to the beach, to get out in the sun. I could breathe again. You see? That's all they really wanted you to do, was run out and be consumers. And they didn't care whether you died at the cash register, buying a new pair, something that you can't afford. They didn't care. Just as long as you were out buying something so that their businesses and their corporations could stay lit, could keep going. So now we're in the middle of this pandemic that none of us expected. While capitalism is in a global crisis, and people have taken to the streets to demand their human rights. This is unprecedented. If you would have told me in 1969 and 1970, when I was in the Black Panther Party, that I would see a day like this, I would have told you, man, ain't nothing like that. These people are too stupid. Well, never underestimate the power of plenty stupid people. Because here we are. So what are you going to do? They got a song that now that you found love, what you going to do with it? What you going to do with it? Are you going to allow misleaders amongst us to keep us separated? To tell us that you are bad and he is wrong and I'm right? Or are we going to say, no. This has a history. This was the history. And that history has to be rectified. Otherwise, we can't go forward. You have to reimagine life. And you have to reimagine what government and democracy really mean. And it doesn't mean democratic fascism. It doesn't mean a war on terror. Because the war on terror, as the sign said, is a war on us. We are the targets of the war on terror. And we have to protect ourselves. We have to defend ourselves. And the best way for us to defend ourselves is to organize. I believe it was a communist woman activist during the movement to unionize labor in America that said, let's not mourn, organize. Don't mourn, organize. 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 We don't need uniformity. We require unified unity based on principle and common humanity and common decency. That's our forte. That's our strength. Not division, not racism, not sexism and misogyny and hatred. We should have freedom dreams. We all need to be dreaming in season. Because right now, freedom is out of season. We're dreaming out of season right now. If we think this world is going to get better without us stepping up and stepping forward, it won't. And some of us may pass, some of us may go to prison, but like they said back in the old days, you know, when the fascists was rising to power and they were putting stars of David on Jews who believed that they were German. They believed that they were German first. They believed in the jingoistic nationalism of the white supremacist and racist state of Germany. And they thought that they was part of this. They weren't. So when they came for the communists, the leftists, who resisted the fascists, nobody said nothing. When they came for the intellectuals and the academicians who were talking about democracy and resistance to tyranny and authoritarianism, nobody said nothing. And then when they came for the minority, when they came for the Jews, there was nobody left to say anything. You want to do the same thing? When they come for the radicals who resist the nation state, you're not going to say anything. When they come for the left, who resist fascism, you're not going to say anything. When it comes for the intellectuals who preach freedom and who preach respect for nature and lock them up and kill them and demonize them, you're not going to say anything. So who's going to be around when it comes to your ass to say something? No, right. Everybody will be. So I'm here to tell you, or advise you, or to inform you, and urge you to build a united front. Because what we know is evil. What we know is wrong. That's white supremacy, racism, fascism, and the inhumane treatment of people of color. With this united front, we will win. In fact, what I've urged activists in the States constantly, time and time again, you are on the right side of history. So you need to fight as if you already won, because you have. We need to resist fascism as if we already won. What does that mean? That we have to practice the reimagination of the nation state until we take it over and become the state. You have to fight like you already won. Because the biggest fight, the most difficult fight, is after you seize power, after you become the norm. That's when the fight begins. So, I hope that I've made sense to many of you. I hope I've given you some food for thought. I trust that you haven't pigeonholed me into some cubicle somewhere as a hater. Because I am a hater. I hate oppression. I hate exploitation. And most of all, I hate bullying. Whether they're wearing a blue costume with a gun on their hip, or whether they're a fascist clubbing and beating defenseless people, that's what I do hate. But what I love is our common humanity. And I'm willing to stand up for you, even if you're not going to stand up for your goddamn self. Because I know that, I'm in the winter of my life, I guess. Nobody knows when they're going to go. But I know one thing, I'm not getting out this life alive. So that's why I came all the way over to Germany to talk to you guys. I might get on the plane and get back and the plane might crash. But if one of you is inspired, just one out of this whole crew, to stand up and answer the call for revolutionary change, hey, I'm just one person, I'm out of here, but you're still here. You need to take up that struggle. You need to be something to somebody other than yourself. And that's why I came. And that's why I'm so grateful for the brothers and sisters that brought me here and gave me this opportunity. And I suggest that we all work together to build this united front across borders. Because believe me, the fascists and the right wing in Europe is rising up, and they're unified. They're transnational. Steve Bannon, this piece of shit, he flies over and gives speeches in Berlin. I'm going to Berlin next. Yeah, I got something to say to them too. I'm going to Berlin, and hopefully, I'll be meeting with some of the former political prisoners there, and they'll be in the audience and everything. But I'm just saying that if I'm pulled over at the airport because I was inciting violence against the state because they have monitored my speech, this street, and they say, you're talking some anti-American shit, let me see that laptop. You know me. I enjoy that shit.
enjoy watching them turn red and shit. You know, I got a story to tell you about when I went to Israel, and I was going to, actually Palestine, because I don't go to Israel. I was going to Palestine, and as soon as I got off the bus, it was just me and a comrade. And we were the only black people on the bus. And we were coming across the bridge there, what is it? King Hussein Bridge or something? I forgot. Hey, enjoy it. And we come across the bus. As soon as we got off the bus, there's these Israeli soldiers standing there. They got one of some of them got a German shepherd over here, and they're standing there, and they got their automatic weapons. And everybody getting off the bus, and they taking their little luggage out, you know, out the bus, you know, underneath the bus when you pull the luggage out. So I pull out my little, you know, carry on and shit. And they say, excuse me, you and you over there. Now you think, now, where did you hear that before? Huh? Auschwitz? Bergen-Belsen? Where did you hear that before? Auschwitz? Where did you hear? You here and you there. You heard that before, right? You heard that before. So he said, you over here. So I go over there. And he said, leave your bags there and go in there. I said, why am I leaving nothing? Just leave your bags. Then they got a dog there. Damn! Now I love dogs. You know. So I know it wasn't the dog's fault. You know. The dog, it was the master's. You know. So I said, go over there for what? So just go in there. Give me your passport. You have your passport? He said, yeah. So give it to me and go in the room there. Go in the room. There's another story. You sit here and you sit there. You know, I comply. But I know what's taking place. Right? Then this guy comes in and says, you know, takes me in and he says, so he has my passport. He says, so why are you visiting Israel? I'm not visiting Israel. He says, you're not? He says, why are you here? I said, I'm visiting Palestine. But you know that everything went downhill from there, right? Everything went downhill from there. He said, well, this is Israel, and you are here, and what purposes are you here? I said, I was invited by the youth league of the Palestinian Liberation Organization to attend a conference on political prisoners. And he said, well, do you have any? Could you give me the names of some individuals that invited you? So I gave him the paper, you know, from the invite from the organization. He looked at it. He handed it over to his boy. His boy went out the door. And then this other guy comes back. He stands in the door. You know, he don't say nothing. He stands in the door. And the guy starts questioning. He says, do you have the email address? Do you have the email? I said, yeah, I have email. He says, what's your email address? What you want my email address? He said, my email is my name and Gmail. He says, okay. How many email addresses do you have? I said, how many do you want? So he says to me, well, you know, we're in a state of emergency here. So we have to exercise all of these precautions because terrorists, you know, the threat of terrorism and all of this stuff is pretty cool. I said, well, I hear that. You know, I said, if I was occupying somebody else's land, I'd be worried too. He said, oh, I see what's happening. You're a wise guy. Right? He says, go sit over there and look. So he calls my boy. Now my boy is more, he's off the chain. He's crazier than me. So they call him over there and he's talking. So then they said, okay, you have to be searched. Okay, so we go into the room and this young soldier comes, you know, tells me to take off all my clothes. And I said, look at this guy. I said, for what? He said, because, you know, I have to search you. I said, I don't go that way. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'm not gay. He turned red. So what you mean? What you mean? I said, I mean, you might be hard about the hard stuff, but hey, it's not me. He ran out the room, came back, 2 more guys. Are you gonna remove your clothes? Now, the guy that first took me, he's standing in the doorway now, which told me he's kind of like homophobic.
So anyway, they searched me and everything. But they wouldn't let me in. You know, they wouldn't let me in. And I said, well, damn, you know, I'm unwanted. They took my computer, and then they wanted the password for my computer. I wouldn't give it to them, you know. Then they tried to take the camera from my comrade. He wanted to fight, and we wound up tussling with them. And this was crazy. And then they made us sit there until like 11 o'clock at night. And then they had the bus come all the way back across the bridge and picked us up and gave our passport to the bus driver. He said, give me your passport when you get back on the other side and enjoy it. And so that was my sojourn into the only democratic country in the Middle East. Yeah. The bastion of Western democracy, Israel. And I just want to drop that on you, because I know you got a lot of folks to try to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And I'm telling you, you've been distorting history. You've been getting away with that shit. Don't try that shit with me. Because they're not the same. You know what the Balfour Agreement was. You know what happened after the end of World War I. You know what the British occupation of Levant that was ceded to them by the League of Nations were. You know all of that. You could fool people, because you know some of the most stringent Zionists in America are white supremacists. Did you know that? There was a time when white supremacists used to hate Jews just like they hated black folks. Now it's different. They believe in the rapture now, the evangelicals. They believe that when Israel is controlled by the Jews, then Jesus will come back to earth, and all the righteous people are going to be raptured back, and there's going to be peace and harmony on the planet. That's what they believe. These evangelicals. I know some of these assholes. You know, and they believe that. So they're more Zionists than Israelis. And U.S. policy is designed to reinforce that. Root and branch. The guns that are murdering, the bombs and the tear gas that's being used against the Palestinian people has made in America on it. Made in America. And the sad part about it is the black congressional caucus, my so-called political representatives, they rubber stamp that. They don't question nothing. Just like they don't question what's happening in the Congo. Just like they don't question what's happening. They are the comprador class of black people in America. And you might have a couple of them come to this university and give you a speech. You know? The Jesse Jacksons and the late bootlicker John Lewis. These individuals. They hold up as icons of black success. All of the good freedom fighters from the civil rights movement are dead. All of the traitors and betrayers of black people in America are still kicking the bucket down the road. They're still alive. So this incident, this condition in the Middle East affects me right there in America. Just like it's affecting you right here in Austria. It's very serious. You are complicit with injustice. You are complicit with the murder of Palestinian children. You are complicit with the destruction of their houses and their homes and the theft of their land. You are complicit with it because you're silent. And you say nothing. And you do nothing. And the government does what it does in your name. There's Austrian soldiers in the Sahel. There's German soldiers in the Sahel. There are French soldiers in the Sahel. There are American special forces in the Sahel. What the fuck are they doing in Africa? They're fighting terrorism in Mali, in Cameroon. They're fighting terrorists. They're fighting ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram. Now you think some people is crazy. They're crazy. But they're supposed to be there fighting them. And then when you look at what these so-called hashtag Islamic extremists are, you find out that they all have their origin in national movements, in movements against the status quo and against those in the capital, in Bamako, in Dakar, who have exploited their people in the name of the French, for the Germans, for Austria. And if you look at the history of West Africa, you'll see that West Africa has had at least a dozen jihads in 1 century. So this is not new. People trying to overthrow imperialists and create their own historical paradigm is nothing new. And your army is there for one reason and one reason only. For the coltan and your cell phone. For your way of life. For your comfort. For your wealth. To steal the minerals of these people while they don't even have potable water. And if you know the history of Europe in relationship to people's resistance movements, you'll know that the Communist Party of Europe, all of them, the Communist parties in France, in England, never supported the armed struggles of people in Africa for their liberation. Never. They always talked about peaceful transition, establishing a common market. And these were provinces of France or of Britain. You know, I had an IRA friend, Irish Republican Army friend, who was a prisoner in the Federal House of Detention with me. We were in the same isolation unit. And he was a funny guy. His name was Michael O'Rourke. He was the one that put the bomb in Mountbatten's boat. You remember Mountbatten, the guy that got blew up in the boat, was supposed to oversee the transition of India and stuff. We know what happened with that. What are we talking about now? Pakistan and India and war and Bangladesh. What are we talking about now? All of these, this is the same shit. British did. We still fighting. We fight each other now. Anyway, he told me, he said, look, he said, you know, he had this thick Irish brogue. I mean, you can hardly understand this guy. He had this thick Irish accent. And I can't really imitate it, but he said to me, he said, look, and the way he pronounced my name was so funny, I used to laugh every time he said it. I had to laugh, but I knew he wasn't trying to mispronounce my name. Purpose, he just had this thick Irish brogue. And he said, look, he said, the British have never went anywhere that you didn't have to kick their ass out. He was right. He was talking about Northern Ireland then. He said, everywhere that the British went, if you didn't put your foot in their ass, they will never leave. So I'm telling you the same thing too. Wherever the Americans went and bought off the elite in those countries, in order to get them out, you got to put your foot in their ass. You don't understand nothing else. That's why Trump was always talking that tough guy shit. You see? He's always talking that, you know, strongest army in the world. We have weapons nobody else has. We'll reduce you to atomic dust. Everybody's scared. Now, you're all scared of the Americans. Y'all all scared of their military power. And now they got a space force. They got space cadets. Space cadets used to mean that you was crazy. But now they got a whole space force and everything. And everybody is crumbling. They're the leader of the free world. It was Mao Zedong who said that imperialism and the imperialists are paper tigers. But the power of the people is greater than the man's technology, than the imperialist technology. And it's true. And the people's power resides in you. It resides in you. If we want justice in the Middle East, we have to fight against imperialism and all of its agents and provocateurs who perpetuate it. We have to unify for our common humanity. Everybody deserves a right to life and self-determination. If you ain't with that program, then you're on the other side of the barricade. And you should be treated accordingly. So I'm going to end there. I think I babbled on for over an hour, maybe two. See, Now you're shaking his head. You did battle. You was battle. You know, yeah, I'm glad you voiced that. So I know many of you have some questions, and also, I hope I didn't talk. Did I talk too fast? I know I did. But I apologize. Like I said, you know, English is my only language. It's my only language. And I'm not good at it at all. So, if you have questions, and I'm willing to try to answer them to the best of my ability. And if I can't, you know, Allah knows best.
Sorry, before we come to the Q&A, I have a little announcement according to the things you can get on the info table. Hope you don't mind if I do this in German. I think this will work better.
I'm in Austria. How can I mind that you do it?
Also es gibt mehrere Materialien dort. Die roten Sachen sind von der kommunistischen Jugend und vom kommunistischen Studierendenverband. Die sind einfach zum Nehmen. Dann die zweite Sache ist, es gibt eine Doku und ein Buch. Die sind dort auch noch zu erwerben. Ich glaube, die Jungs werden noch am Stand präsent sein. Ja. Und die dritte Sache ist, das Ganze findet heute ohne Gage statt. Es geht rein um die Sache. Deswegen haben wir eine Spendenbox aufgestellt und es wäre sehr super, wenn ein bisschen Geld reinkommen wird. Also nicht für uns, sondern für unseren Gast. So. No, I didn't make a joke, I don't know what it was.
Everybody laughs!
I just said they should give you money because you're here.
Oh, no! Don't just give me money because I'm here. Give me money because I'm broke.
Well, okay, but I think we can now come to the questions.
You told more times about the Palestinian people. And I would like if you underline and if you explain maybe here for the auditory why this point is so important for you, what the Palestinian struggle means for your struggle as Black people.
Yes. You know, I know you all know from the background and reading the information, I was in the Black Panther Party. And the Black Panther Party was a Pan-African organization in that our international, we were internationals. We believed that our struggle was both a racial and a class struggle. It was not just exclusively about race, it was about class as well. So we came kind of like, we had alliances with other revolutionary organizations and liberation movements in Europe and around the world, okay? Because of our politics. Like I said, unity is based on principle. And knowing the history of the Palestinian peoples and their struggle, in some of the history that I enunciated to you, we saw that they were our allies. And all oppressed people on this planet are inherently or principally allies of each other. And that if we support each other, we are much more powerful than if we're divided from each other. So the Black Panther Party had an alliance with, then it was at first the PFLP, the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and then later on with other formations that became the PLO and stuff. This is a long-standing support that we have. And the reason why we saw the connection between the two is because of white supremacy and racism. That the state of Israel that Zionism was a European racist philosophy. It was a jingoistic nationalist philosophy. And it was the same type of racist philosophy that I explained to you that the Europeans used when they colonized the United States and enslaved my people. So we felt a kinship with oppressed people in Palestine. We felt that their struggle for self-determination against settlers, against European settlers, was a righteous struggle, and that we were their allies. We were also allies with the Vietnamese people. We were allies with the people in the Congo, with the people in Mozambique, and in South Africa. We were strong supporters of the ANC in South Africa. What was South Africa? A European settler state. And who were the major allies between South Africa during the era of apartheid? Israel. So as I pointed out to you, white supremacists and jingoistic nationalists all unify against oppressed people. They're always in unity. We're the ones that don't have unity. So it was our obligation as Pan-Africans to unify with other people's struggle and work with other people. In fact, we had an embassy or a consulate in Algeria. And that was right after the Algerian Revolution, and they had sacked the French. And so all of the liberation movements from all over Africa and Asia were in Algeria. They had representatives in Algeria. And so we became very close to liberation movements. In fact, what a lot of people don't know is that North Korea, under Kim Il-sung, passed a resolution in the UN condemning white supremacy and racism and oppression of black people in America. They don't know that. In 1969. You don't know that. But today, the North Koreans are the pariah of the Western world. They're supposed to be authoritarian warmongers, and this is a closed society. And all some of these things, some of these contradictions may be oppressive to the North Korean people. I'm not going to say they're not. But I do know one thing. North Korea was bombed almost into the Stone Age by the United States military. And any people that forget that, they're destined to repeat that process. That's one of the reasons why they take the positions that they do towards the West, towards the South. It's in their history. They cannot trust the United States, for instance, conducting military exercises off their coast, right within range of their homeland, when they know that the history of the United States was jingoistic, and that the history of the United States had bombed and killed hundreds of thousands of North Koreans. And they also know that North Korea was partitioned, just like Vietnam. It was partitioned between the North and the South. You see? And this was a product of American imperialism, of Western hegemony. So they know who the enemy is. But I just wanted to point that out to you. And that the Palestinians also have offered us support. They help send some of our members to universities in Moscow and universities in Europe. They were comrades in this common struggle against imperialism. So we identified with them. And we identified just like we identified with all oppressed people. And so we were opposed to the philosophy of imperialism that enslaved them, that deprived them of their liberty and deprived them of their land. You see, we were in solidarity with the American Indian movement too. You know, we still are. I mean, that's who we were. We were in solidarity with poor white workers in the coal mines of Appalachia. You know, the Black Panther Party was always painted as this racist organization. It was an anti-police organization. That's furthest from the truth. We were in solidarity with working people everywhere. In Palestine, and the Palestinian struggle was a linchpin to U.S. policy in the region. If you know the history, if you know about the Cold War, both Iran under the Shah of Shah Pahlavi, under the Shah, and Israel were the major military powers keeping the Soviet Union, which was the enemy of the U.S. at the time, from moving into the Mediterranean, from establishing itself in that region. And so when Iran fell, I believe it was 74, when Iran fell in 74, the Black Panther Party was no longer in existence. You see? And so we have always had solidarity with other peoples. If you go back to end of World War II, Paul Robeson was oppressed and castigated because of his solidarity and his belief in socialism and his solidarity with the Soviet Union and with the Palestinian people. We have a long history of solidarity with oppressed people. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was one of the major lights, was once a member of the American Communist Party. And he fell out with the Communist Party over what I'm talking about now, the racism of the left. The idea and notion of white supremacy. And the counterintelligence program in America used that against us as well. Because we had the support in the 1960s of the American Communist Party in terms that we had a class analysis, and we believed in working class empowerment and the power of unions and the power of black people to be in unions. Because in America, when socialism and communism began to organize labor at the turn of the century in the 20s after World War I, it was racism that was used to divide the working class in America, from black workers and white workers. So we were always pro-working class. But the problem with that is that the Communist Party in America was predominantly white. And even amongst that, especially after World War after World War II, they were predominantly European Jews who had fled Nazis, who had fled to America. So the counterintelligence program, the government, would use that to divide us. And they had a program called Ehre. This was a counterintelligence program. And what it was is they would write false letters to the Jewish members of the Communist Party in America, saying that the Black Panther Party were anti-Semitic, that we hated Jews, and that we were racist, and all of these things, so that they would withdraw their support from the Black Panther Party. And it worked. And they did the same thing when Black Power became the cry of the Civil Rights Movement. There was a point in the Civil Rights Movement in 1968, 69, when the Civil Rights Movement, the slogan in the Civil Rights Movement at that time was, "We shall overcome," and it was a nonviolent movement. And it was against institutional racism and segregation. And it was students, just like you, who got on the buses and did the freedom ride and desegregated and got beaten, and some of them murdered, to make America a better democracy, a more just society. And so after years of the civil rights movement, which was led by Dr. King and SCLC and SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. These were all young people who organized in the South, organized poor people, sharecroppers, people who never voted, who could hardly read, so that they could go vote. And we were forced to defend ourselves against these racists like the Ku Klux Klan and like the Proud Boys you hear about today, these armed agents, okay? So only when the Black Panther Party came along and took up the gun to defend ourselves from these racist attacks, that the state decided that they had to get rid of us, and they had to scare white people into believing that we were, one, anti-Semitic, that we hated Jews, we hated white people, we hated police. And this is what they did. But it backfired on them because in one march, before the organization of March to Selma, a brother by the name of Mukasa Ricks, along with a person that you may have known is Philippi Carmichael. His name is Kwame Ture. He died, but his name is Kwame Ture. They threw their fists in the air on this march and said, "Black power. We want black power." And Malcolm X said that black people should control the institutions in their community. Black power. Power to the people. And the minute that we said black power, all of the support from the Communist Party and the Jews who were in the civil rights organization evaporated. The minute we talked about self-determination and controlling our community, those in the Communist Party on the left abandoned our solidarity. Why? Because we found out that racism was just as rampant in the left, and white supremacy was just as rampant on the right as it was on the left. And that played itself out into the solidarity with people of color around the world. We were in solidarity with the liberation movements all over Africa, PAIGC, in Guinea-Bissau, in Angola, MPLA, in Frelimo, in Mozambique. You see, we believe from that point on that only by defending ourselves against white supremacy and racism could we survive. So the gun that the Black Panther Party used, and this is where we dropped the name Black Panther Party for self-defense, and just became the Black Panther Party. And the guns that we had and that we exhibited and that we patrolled the streets with, patrolling the law enforcement, were not meant as a macho statement of, you know, I'm macho and I'm badder than you and all of this. It was a tool, an instrument of propaganda. We called it armed propaganda. That black people had to see that unless they defended their human rights, they would become victims of people who are violent. I just explained to you how violent Americans are. How that settler mentality that conquered the North American continent was a violent settler mentality. They are violent. All European settlers are violent. That's how they're settlers. That's why they take land. They take it by force of arms, with guns. The only defense that we have is we have to defend ourselves, and defend our integrity, and defend our community. Because as Joe Biden said, Joe won't sleepy Joe. Joe Biden said that burning buildings is not protest. He said that burning corporate stores and taking their goods is not protest. And he says they're violent and they're criminal acts. That's what he said. And he said at the end of that little statement that nothing good comes from violence. And I agree with him. America came from violence. Ain't nothing good about that. You see? But what he didn't say was that America, I mean, when you threw tea into Boston Harbor, the Tea Party, Boston Tea Party, now you know how much British like tea. When in 1776 and you threw the tea in the harbor, that tea didn't belong to you. It belonged to King George. And you threw it in the harbor. When you burned down his tax ships, his schooners that came to collect the taxes, those ships were assaulted and burned down, and the crews were beaten. That's violence. When you robbed the stores of the British Army and shot British soldiers, that was violence. George Washington, at the age of 27, I believe, had a bounty on his head. He was a criminal. So how is it that violence was good for you to find America, but it's not good for us to defend ourselves from your ass? You see? Violence is as American as cherry pie. And it's an essential ingredient of imperialism and a European settler state mentality. How did the Europeans wind up with South Africa? Violence. And the only person that resisted them, that held them at bay for almost 50 years was who? Shaka Zulu. A violent savage. He's the only one that ever defeated the military in South Africa. What is Zulu? You see? So violence never begets anything except more violence. But it's necessary sometimes, like Mao Zedong said, to pick up the gun in order to stop those with the gun from murdering you and killing you and taking your livelihood. So we were not wedded to violence just because it was some macho thing. This was about self-defense, and we're right where we're at then. We're fighting the same fight now. The white community in America, these Proud Boys and Boogaloo, these militias, they're armed to the teeth. And the black community, we're criminals, we're thugs. Guns in the black community is illegal, but it's not illegal for these crackers, for these white folks. Okay? How has it become illegal? Because in America, you can't own a gun if you got a criminal record. So what do? They stop and frisk you for broken tail lights. They stop you because, you didn't stop at a stop sign. And you get a criminal record. So if you go to get a gun to protect your family, or to even go hunting, you're prohibited from getting a gun. So people don't understand the intricacies of how law enforcement is organized against people of color in America to suppress them and keep them suppressed. Well, hopefully right now that shit is going ahead. So soon the guns will be drawn. And I assure you that you're going to be looking at the news in less than 40 days before the U.S. election, and you're going to see some unprecedented violent shit in America. Because, you know, it said that God makes insane those he intends to destroy. And you got an insane motherfucker that's president of the United States. He's made them crazy. And they actually believe that black people are a threat to them. That we want to come into the suburbs and take their house. I mean, seriously, they believe this. They believe that somehow, when we say Black Lives Matter, we mean that their lives don't matter. Well, it was clear. I just gave you the history. It was Black lives in America never mattered. Never. It was always a question of mind over matter. White folks didn't mind and black people didn't matter. So we're headed towards this historical movement again. Again. We're at where we were when Richard Nixon took office and declared the war on drugs and stated to his own administration that he's going to do two things. He's going to criminalize drug use because a whole generation of white young people had turned on and tuned out of the system and were taking LSD and smoking weed and dancing to black music, you know, shaking their booty and shit. So he said, that's the first thing we got to do, because they were the major mass force behind the anti-war movement were young students. You know, and they were white. And many of them came from educated families. They came from middle-class families. But now they had turned their back on all those values. So he had to put that in check. And then the ghettos were burning. The domestic colonies were burning every summer. Black people were taken to the streets and burning stuff down. So he had to deal with that. So he had to criminalize that. He had to become a law and order president. We're going to take back the streets. Does that sound familiar? What is Trump talking about? I'm the law and order president. We're going to take back the streets. Okay? And then the third thing was he had to destroy the power of unions in America. Reagan completed that task when he decertified the air traffic union. And today, you have states, the majority of the states have a right to work law, okay, where union organization doesn't exist. So working class people have lost their power because of the resurgence of race and class fascism. And this is white workers. So these poor people who are out there in the suburbs who think that we want to take something from them, who are guarding the borders and think that migrants that's coming to the country are going to take something from them, are victims of their own white supremacy and their own racism. Because the fact of the matter is, in 25 years, America is going to be a majority country of people of color. And white folks are going to be the minority. This is the demographic. They're scared to death. So they go back to their own settler mentality when they were a minority. Okay? And it's based on guns and violence. So that's what they're doing. They're arming themselves and they're trying to convince themselves that somehow we are a threat, people of color are a threat to American democracy and the American way of life. So our solidarity with the Palestinian people has always been to influence American policy towards Palestine. Okay? But because we have black elected officials who are cowards, who are only in it for themselves, who have no principle, they rubber stamp American foreign policy, and then America then represents me in Palestine. So if I go to the Middle East with an American passport, I'm not seen as a revolutionary who's in solidarity with the oppressed people of North Africa, with Muslims. I'm seen as an American. You see? And I always have to explain to folks when I go through Egypt, you know, because you get the Egyptians are deep. When I go through Egypt, I have to explain to them, I say, look, man, you know, I'm not a white boy. I said, what does that mean? I said, I ain't a white boy. You know? So they don't understand that until they do something stupid. You see? And they say, well, you know, you stand over there, and then they bring a white couple through, process their passport, stamp it, and they keep moving. I tell you, I ain't a white boy. So why did you do that? Why didn't you stamp my passport? In fact, you can take this motherfucking passport, throw it at him. I don't want to, put me back on the plane. I done made a scene. Wait, hold up. I told you I wasn't a white boy. I'm not going to react the way a white boy will. You see? It is very important for Africans to do this. Because we are stereotyped, even by our comrades who are Arabs. We are stereotyped into being into Americanism, into being Americans. What is an American? I mean, what the hell is that? You see? If you know the history, you say, man, I ain't no American. I ain't with that history. You see? But that's the whole point. Our solidarity with the Palestinian people were based on the fact that we face the same common oppressor and the same systems of imperialism and racism. And it was robbing us of our lives, our livelihood, and killing our family. That's what our solidarity is based on.
I'm sorry, but
I hope I answered your question.
I have to ask you to maybe answer
Sure,
a little more content.
Yeah, I got you. But you know, I only get an opportunity once in 10 years to come and talk to people like this, so I tend to go off. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I heard.
Earlier you mentioned that you read a lot of books in prison, and the last years or so I've heard more and more news that the accessibility of books is being more and more restricted in prisons, also because of economical reasons, but like it comes with the political reasons. And I wanted to first ask you whether you could comment on the prison industrial complex and whether you think that the accessibility of books is being restricted to turn the radicalism in prisons into a destructive force, like intentionally, because people naturally get more radical in the prison, and before it was the space where people would organize, like or recruit, like the Nation of Islam, or I think even the Black Panthers.
Well, accessibility of reading material in prisons has always been censored and curtailed. But we need to understand that mass incarceration in the United States was a result of the success of the civil rights movement in the 60s. The pushback by Southern politicians and by the system was to incarcerate black people. And because, you know, with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, black people then, when they, in areas where they were the majority, could then determine local government, who would be their representative, you see? And the only way to deal with that was to, first of all, divide the districts in ways that broke up the black majority in the area, and to imprison a significant number of their young people and poor and unemployed and put them in prison. You see, because once you get a felony in the U.S. in most states, you can't vote. You see, so that was a pushback against the success of the 60s and the civil rights movement, mass incarceration. And today you have over 2.5 million people in prison and over 30 million people, over 24 million people who have criminal records and they can't vote. So you see, they have managed to change the voting paradigm through the law, basically. You see, and of course, access to certain types of reading material is prohibited in prison, especially material that talks about oppression and exploitation. And I wanted to point out that when I was in prison, the books that I got from the library, the only reason I was able to access those books because the prison authorities didn't realize the value of the information. Why would they stop me from reading Das Kapital? They didn't read it. They didn't even know what it meant. Why would they stop me from reading a book about the Ottoman Empire? What's the Ottoman Empire? It's a couch? It's a sofa? You see people that make couches and rugs. I mean, they didn't have a clue. You have to understand the ignorance of racism is profound. You know, you're in your own world. You know, so those things were of value to me, inconsequential to them. But now it's different. They know what's in the library. They know that Malcolm X came out of prison. They know that George Jackson was in prison. They know that that prison was like a cockpit, was like a university for revolutionaries. So that's why they try to stem the flow of printed material into prison.
Yeah, my question would be, what you say, what are the lessons from the struggles from the 70s? You spoke about the widespread solidarity. There was a very strong revolutionary struggle in the 60s and 70s, what you told before. It was not possible in this time to defeat imperialism.
But we see, this is the whole thing.
Liberation struggle was very strong. But with your consciousness of history, what is your advice for today? If you see
I just
the
told
situation,
you. I just told you.
Is the new time for Black
Yes.
Panther Party again?
No, you can't have the Black Panther Party back again. But you can build a united front against fascism today. It transcends borders. That has class consciousness. It's anti-racist. You can do that. Because in the 60s, in 69, the Black Panther Party, realizing that the left in America was very strong. There were students who were in the streets. There were student organizations that were against the war. The anti-war movement was strong. It was a mass movement. The ghettos, the black ghettos, and the Mexican communities were up in arms and mobilized against racism. The civil rights movement was at its zenith. So the Black Panther Party said, well, given all of this on the left, we need to build a united front. And that's what we did. We called for a national front, a national united front against fascism in 1969. And over 5,000 activists showed up in California for this convention. 5,000. And they came from all over. White working class youth came from Appalachia, came from the coal mines. Mexican, Chicanos came from the Southwest. Black people came from Chicago, from New York. Latinos came from Florida. People from all over, activists, came to this united front. And we sat down and we organized what we called national committees to combat fascism. So everybody could have a national committee and go back to their particular city and organize themselves to do what? To decentralize the police, to take control of local law enforcement, to build up community power and control of the armed agents of the state. So we called a front in 69. How did it fail? That's your lesson. And that's why I'm telling you how it failed. You see? It failed. But the enemy has institutional memory, and we don't. They knew how successful it was and what they had to do to derail it. And so they're going back to their playbook. They're using the same playbook today with Black Lives Matter. They're using the same playbook. So these black activists in the streets who think that organizing on a cell phone is the same as organizing face-to-face, right? They're reinventing failure because they're not attached to their radical legacy. They don't know what happened before. So they're going to make the same mistake. Enemy knows what happened before, and they're not going to make the same mistake. They knew how to get white people riled up and get them all scared and fear. You got to understand, fear is the major instrument of fascism. It's fear. White supremacy is based on fear. You see? And they know how potent it is. And you can see it every day. You can see it unfolding right before our very eyes. Now Americans are talking about China's existential threat. Fear of the yellow plague. It's the same racist trope from the 20s. Fear of...
We have here now a similar situation in Austria, for example, all over Europe, that we see people from the left also they have fear, for example, to get in contact with organizations who are in solidarity with Palestine. Because we see that in mass media, for example, these people are they're attacked. So also the organizations, they go to distance because they in fear. Yeah.
It's fair, absolutely. I mean, the United States, under the pressure from global Zionism, has outlawed the BDS movement. I mean, it's basically made BDS, some type of boycott and divestment movement, some type of anti-democratic or anti-Semite movement, anti-Semitic movement, And they've been very successful at this. And so I've been urging activists in the U.S., for instance, especially those who are on the legal front, those who are fighting in the courts to change the laws, that we use the law to make an application to bring a suit against the AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Committee, and have them register as an agent of a foreign government. Right now, AIPAC is not registered as an agent of a foreign government, but it performs as the agent of Israel in America. That's what it does. It even writes some of the American foreign policy verbatim. That's how influential they are. They also provide money to black elected officials who endorse or who rubber stamp U.S. Foreign aid, U.S. military aid. So even our leaders, our black leaders, are under the sway of AIPAC. They don't represent our community. You see, and so that's important. And the BDS movement has been demonized, and isolated. And then, because there's a history of guilt here in Austria and Germany, I mean, there's an enormous amount of guilt over what had happened in World War II, and the wholesale murder of Roma people and Jewish people and people of color by the Nazis. Okay? So this enormous amount of guilt has gone to create the persona or the idea in radicals here, in the left here, that to be anti-Israeli is to be anti-Zionist. I mean, to be anti-Israeli, be anti-Zionist is to be anti-Semitic. So they have twisted this history. That's why I was telling you about the history. They have twisted this history, the history of Zionism. And they made it look like if you anti-Zionist, you're anti-Jew. There's nothing further from the truth. And just in case you just don't know it, the reason why I'm sitting here is because of a Jewish lawyer who took my case. My best friend, Elizabeth M. Fink. May Allah be pleased with her. She passed away 2 years ago. She was a fighter. She was a commie baby. She grew up in the Communist Party. This was my girl, Elizabeth Fink. She got me out of jail. She took my case and fought my case for 4 years without no money, for no. Just because she was the attorney, she was an attorney for the Attica brothers. And if you know anything about Attica, Attica was a prison rebellion that over 41 inmates were murdered by the state. And she brought a suit against Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York at the time. Okay? On behalf of the inmates that were killed, on behalf of the inmates. She fought that suit for 10 years without a dime, and she won. So she's always been my. And I think about it, I get all emotional. She was Jewish. The other lawyer was Irish. Irish. Robert Boyd. If you look at that video, I don't know if you saw it, because if you look at the video, you'll see Elizabeth Fink. She was a stout, big Jewish woman, And before we would go into the court, they used to always try to, they would have a DA, a district attorney there on the other side representing the state and the government. Would be some prim little white woman, you know, was nice and slim and dressed and talked nice. And Liz was big and, you know, she wasn't, quote, pretty, you know, by those standards. But Liz was a fighter. They were scared to death of her. Scared of this woman. But she would get in court, and she used to say, man, she used to say, let's go out in court, let's go out there and kick their ass. She said, right on, Liz, let's go. And Liz would stand up for me, and that's why I'm here, is because of the Jewish lawyer. So if you think I'm anti-Jewish, you're a goddamn fool. You see? So I just said that because that's a personal thing. You know, for you to understand, the political is personal, and the personal is political. You see? She stood for what was right against what was wrong.
Any last question?
So you touched shortly on it, but I was wondering how well organized the Black Lives Matter movement in the US really is, and do you think, do you think it is enough or many organizations, a few organizations are needed to bring actual change? And do you hope that maybe from this movement there will be maybe a new party or a new organization that is big enough to take up the fight?
Well, I have a problem with Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to, you know, I write about it, I speak about it, and Black Lives Matter is a hashtag movement, okay? And hashtag movements are not liberation movements. So they leave space for reactionaries and for other forces to come in and redefine or misdirect the mobilization of people. The problem with the Black Lives Matter movement is that it grew out of opportunism. You know, I don't know if any of you know the real history on how it came to be, but basically, I don't want to keep on this question too long. Basically, the Black Lives movement came into being after Trayvon Martin trial, and Zimmerman was acquitted. And then Ferguson came along, the rebellion in Ferguson, where Mike Brown was murdered. And it was this group of black philanthropic activists that had programs and projects. They were very well educated, you know, and they were dealing with things like women's abuse of women and stuff, you know, domestic violence. And these activists came to Ferguson with the hashtag, with the signs, the Black Lives Matter, okay? And the press immediately took to them. And because they were very astute in how to use the press and the media, because these were no dummies, you know, they took advantage of that, right? And so they redefined the movement on the streets as Black Lives Matter, whereas the kids and the people that were on the streets protesting in Ferguson had nothing to do with them. You see? And before you know it, they took that hashtag and they ran with it. And then organizations like Soros and different philanthropists began to fund them. You see? And so the Black Lives Matter movement to me is a hashtag movement. Having said that, the mobilization that is brought about, as I pointed out to you, people were taken to the streets all over the world. This is unprecedented. So this is mobilization on an unprecedented, unexpected level. This is what scares the system. That it was so widespread. It was against class, it was against gender. It brought people together from all over, against the state, against the police violence, okay? And so having that as a focus, what happened is you have mobilization, but you have no organization. And a lot of the white activists who are in the streets with the Black Lives Matter activists came from the Occupy Wall Street movement. You know, a lot of these young kids, these white kids out here, they got more politics than many of the black kids in the streets. They're the ones that's going after CNN and the corporate buildings and the police station. They're not burning down mom and pop stores now. You see? They know who the enemy is. Some of these were veterans of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And if any of you remember that was one of the first global movements against the capitalist elite. I mean, their whole thing was, you know, the 1%, 2% ruling the world. And you had grandmothers out there, housewives, you know, occupy Wall Street, okay? They had to kill that movement, and they did. And the weakness of that movement, like she was trying to explain, what was the lessons we should learn? The weakness of the Occupy Wall Street movement was that it had no leadership. It was not organized. Because they believed that hierarchical structures, you know, if somebody was a leader, then they could kill the leader and the movement would die. They didn't understand that without a leader, the movement was going to die anyway. You see? For somebody, you had to have a leadership character. You had to have people to take responsibility. Yeah, they're going to go to jail. Some of them might even get killed, but you had to have organization. And the Occupy Wall Street movement didn't have that organization. So it was able to be destroyed and shattered in a matter of a few weeks. Well, and in fact, it was Obama who did it. Just do that. Check that out. Old black guy. Yes, he was the one that did it. This is really deep. But he was the one that did it. How did he do it? He called the mayors together from all over America and said, look, this shit got to stop. And they went after them. You saw them on TV. They were macing housewives. I mean, you said, this was one person. I said, damn, man, macing a white woman. This shit is crazy. You know? And this was no radical. She was no radical. She was talking about, look at my mortgage. And what are they doing with this money? You know, some people were attuned to the oppressive nature of capitalism. That's what the Black Lives, the Occupy Wall Street movement was. It was a challenge to global capitalism. And it had to be destroyed. But they destroyed it, and it comes back now with right radicals who are walking around the side saying Black Lives Matter. You see? So truth crushed to earth will always rise again in some other form. And so, the Black Lives Matter movement's major weaknesses, that's the hashtag movement, and it's not organized. There's a Black Lives Matter movement fund. There's a political entity called Black Lives Matter. But when you look at it, their major funding sources come from Kraft, the owner of one of these football teams, and people like Jay-Z, these knuckleheads, these born-again capitalists, you know. And so, anytime the enemy gives you $50 million and tells you, hey, keep it going, you know something's wrong with your mass line. You know, why is these millionaires giving me $50 million? Let's think about this. Why do you know this money? It's something you must be doing that they can take advantage of. You see? And so it's the same thing here. You know that why is the BDS movement ostracized from the left? Because those on the left who are getting funds, who feel that they're part of the status quo, that they can influence them, they don't want to jeopardize their reputation. They don't want to get cut off. They have no principle. The Garvey movement was the most effective black movement in American history. Okay? It was the most effective, and it was the largest mass movement in American history. The Garvey movement at the turn of the century. And you know how they got all their money? They got $1 from each member. $1 a month. $1. And they became the most effective organization. And the government had to go after it. And it was the counterintelligence program that they initiated against Marcus Garvey, that they later initiated against the Communist Party USA. It was the counterintelligence program, of course, which we inherited when we became the Black Panther Party and leading organization in the 60s.
As we come closer and closer to the 3-hour mark, I think it's, I don't know, do you want one more question, or are you good? Okay for you?
Everybody's going to go out and organize this united front. You're going to run out the door there, and we're going to get busy, you know. So I think we're good. Sooner begun, the sooner done. Yeah.
Okay, then I'd like to say thank you. It was a very inspiring talk. And please let's give this man a round of applause.